Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished delegates. We are living through a defining moment for our generation. Our generation is the generation that was supposed by our predecessors to be saved from scourge of war. That is why our predecessors created the United Nations. And yet today, it falls to us to save future generations. Let me read the following text. Our position is that whatever grievances a nation may have, however objectionable it finds the status quo, aggressive warfare is an illegal means for those grievances or for altering those conditions. It may be that the nation faced desperate problems that would have warranted the boldest measures short of war. All other methods, persuasion, propaganda, economic competition, diplomacy, were open to an aggrieved country. But aggressive warfare was outlawed. The defendants did make aggressive war a war in violation of treaties. They did attack and invade their neighbors in order to effectuate a foreign policy which they knew could not be accomplished by measures short of war. And that is as far as we accuse or propose to inquire. End of quote. Said in his opening statement to the International Military Tribunal on November 21, 1945, in the Palace of Justice at Nuremberg, Justice Robert Jackson, Chief of Counsel. And these words are addressed today to Mr. Putin, Mr. Shoigu, Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Volodin, Ms. Matvienko, and perhaps dozens more, but certainly they are not addressed to the Russian citizens, those Russian citizens who try to preserve their dignity. For almost a week, Ukraine is fighting under the bombs and missiles, fighting in the face of armadas of hardware and countless crowds of enemies. They have come to the Ukrainian soil not only to kill some of us, not only to shift our course and priorities. They have come to deprive Ukraine of the very right to exist. They have come to resolve the Ukrainian issue, as their propagandists claimed. Just stop and think whether these words remind you of something. Yes, more than 80 years ago, another dictator tried to finally resolve the issue of another people. He failed. When the world responded in a resolute and united manner, it was happened immediately, and the delay costed dozens of millions of people. Are we ready to pay such a price now? Or is it time to demonstrate the unity of purpose and deeds already now? We appreciate all manifestations of such unity and solidarity with Ukraine. I would like to express gratitude to all member states that support Ukrainians in their battle for freedom. I would also like to thank those member states that accepted Ukrainian refugees, mostly women and children. More than 500,000 have already fled from Russian missiles and shells. I will not recite all facts of new war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Russian troops have committed since my previous statement 2 days ago. The list is so long that it will run out of time. The crimes are so barbaric that it is difficult to comprehend. Facing the total resistance of the Ukrainian population, Putin's regime has proceeded to widespread use of indiscriminate weapons such as multiple rocket launchers and aerial bombs against the residential areas. Ukrainians are being killed by Russian ballistic missiles and thermobaric weapons. Just yesterday, Kiev, Kharkiv, Zhytomyr, Mariupol, Melitopol, and many other cities and towns sustained heavy shellings that killed dozens of innocents, including children. Ukraine deeply regrets that a student from India has become a victim of this shelling by the Russian armed forces in Kharkiv. We offer our deepest sympathies to India and the relatives of the victim. A Chinese citizen was also injured in another Ukrainian city because of Russia's deadly attacks. The Ukrainian and foreign citizens have become hostages of the Russian armed aggression against Ukraine. In Kiev, Russian murderers hit the city TV tower, killing 5 passerbys. One of the missiles dropped on the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial, a sacred place of commemoration of Jews, Ukrainians, Roma, and representatives of other ethnic groups killed by Nazis during the World War II. What an irony when victims of Nazis are being killed for the second time by Nazi modern followers. As the President of Ukraine asked, what was the point of repeating the slogan, never again, in 80 years? It's already clear that the goal of Russia is not an occupation only. It is genocide. On 7th and 8th of March 2022, the International Court of Justice will hold public hearings in the case concerning allegations of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Ukraine versus Russian Federation. Also, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has decided to proceed with opening of a formal investigation into the situation in Ukraine. Unprovoked escalation of Russian aggression against Ukraine gives reasons to believe that crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC continue to be committed on the territory of Ukraine. Along with the situation in Crimea and Donbass, Recent events suggest that aggressors' troops continue to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. Dear colleagues, one might consider, observing the bloodshed in Ukraine, that it is not my war. It is a mistake. The evil will never stop. It requires more and more space to conquer. If tolerated, it advances further and further. The draft resolution is one of the building blocks to build a wall to stop it. To stop in Ukraine and not to let it go further. The wall that will protect all of you, in particular younger generations. Distinguished delegates, by voting today, you also reconfirm your country's commitment to the UN Charter. After the vote, I invite you ambassadors and representatives to stop by the Indonesian lounge and to sign this little blue book. Little but of global magnitude. Every vote in favor of the resolution and every signature of country that voted in favor would be a historical reconfirmation of the Charter. It is very easy, ladies and gentlemen, to sign the Charter at time of peace. It is the duty to sign and reconfirm and implement the Charter at the time of war. So stop by the Indonesian lounge, put the name of your country if you voted in favor, and after you sign this book, I will hand it over to the Secretary General for keeping the book in his office, in front of him. So at every single moment, the Secretary General will get an inspiration from the overwhelming majority of nations who still trust in the UN, who still trust in the UN Charter. There is a very fragile gentleman, a very old one. He was born in a territory that was part of the Kingdom of Hungary. He will celebrate his 102 years birthday in 9 days. His name is Benjamin Ferenc. Benjamin Ferenc was an investigator of war crimes, a chief prosecutor at one of the 12 subsequent trials of Nuremberg. Later, he became an advocate of international rule of law and for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. With the permission of the producer, I would play a couple of seconds of his words. And I want you to listen very carefully.
Hard to do. 3 words: law, not war. If you can do that, you save every day billions of dollars, which you can use to deal with the legitimate complaints of old people who need medical care, students who have to pay for the tuition, all the legitimate complaints which could be solved if we didn't spend our money on weapons to kill them instead of helping them. And that is the current system. Now, how are you going to do it? I will end by telling you how to do it. And the principles which have guided me. There are three principles. One, never give up. Two, never give up. Three, never give up. Good luck. I wish you the best of luck.
Please show respect, since his birthday. I call upon all responsible member states to support the draft. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. The draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. The explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
President, Secretary General, colleagues, Russia would ask for this draft resolution to be put to the vote. And we call on you not to support this draft. However, we know about the unprecedented pressure that our Western partners are exerting on a large number of countries, urging them to vote as they see fit. This is not something even that we can call pressure. It was open and cynical threats, and we know about it. This document will not allow us to end military activities. On the contrary, it could embolden Kiev radicals and nationalists to continue to determine the policy of their country at any price, holding peaceful civilians hostage, but not in the figurative sense of the term, but in the literal sense of it. Now, that is what is happening in a series of cities in Ukraine where people are being used as human shields. Today, we've learned that in the Ukrainian military are not allowing citizens of Mariupol to leave the city. They are keeping them there, including women and children there in one of the schools in Mariupol, and forcing them, turning back all civilians who are trying to leave the city along humanitarian corridors. We also know about planned nationalist battalions who are planning provocations, which they have been preparing with the participation of civilians, so that then they can accuse Russia of having carried them out. Running against norms of international humanitarian law, and military hardware is being placed in residential areas, as well as rocket launchers and artillery. Today, we will provide examples of this to the UN leadership, who are still asserting that they don't have this kind of evidence, although videos taken by Ukrainian citizens are freely available on the internet. Responsibility for this fully lies with the Ukrainian authorities, much like for the irresponsible and criminal distribution of weapons to anyone who wants one, including those who have been released from prison. This has already led to many cases of robbery, murder and plundering. Colleagues, your refusal to support today's draft resolution as a vote for a peaceful Ukraine free from radicalism and neo-Nazism, living in peace with its neighbours and refusing to be managed from outside. This was the aim of our special military operation, who the sponsors of this resolution tried to present as aggression. We heard from the Ukrainian representative words about Nazism, but he didn't mention the rampant neo-Nazism in Ukraine itself and the rampant neo-Nazis and neo-nationalist radical organisations about torch-lit processions and those who support Hitler. Those who are interested in the development of the Ukrainian crisis and how it has developed very much understand where it came from. In actions today, we're trying to stop the 8-year war of the Maidan regime on the people of Donbass. Over the last years, our countries have done everything it can, and things are impossible to avoid this kind of scenario. We, according to the Secretary General, have left no stone unturned and knocked on every door. However, we were not listened to. Those living in Donbass are still being bombed. They don't plan on stopping at 14,000 victims, the vast majority of which are living in the LPR and DPR, were living in the LPR and DPR. The aim of our special operation is announced on the basis of Article 51 of the UN Charter and will be achieved. However, we are not carrying out strikes on civilian facilities and civilians. Don't believe the large number of fakes spread around the internet on this. These fakes have only distributed like biscuits at operation centres, special operations of Ukraine, and this centre was destroyed. A peaceful scenario for Ukraine could happen if the radicals concern about preserving civilian lives in their country and rather than hiding behind them. This is a call in the text before the vote. There is no reference to this call in the text before us to vote on. Nothing is mentioned about the illegal coup in Kiev in February 2014, with the connivance of Germany, France and Poland, and with the support of the United States, where the legitimately elected president of the country was overthrown. This draft does not mention anything along the lines that the new nationalist authorities are limiting the rights of citizens to use the Russian language. This was a green light for a large chain of events of violations of the basic rights of those living in the east of the country, and not only in the east of the country, including the most valuable right, that right to life. Many of you don't want to hear about this, about the tragedies happening in Ukraine after the Maidan coup in 2014. And those people who burnt alive in Odessa, and the crimes of those who didn't agree with them. And the most blatant example of this was the war against Donbass rolled out by Kiev. There's nothing in the document either that over the last 8 years, Europe and the US have been pumping the Ukraine with weapons so that those people can kill civilians in the Donbass. And the loyal authorities in Kiev are fully ignoring the Minsk agreements and sabotaging Security Council Resolution 2202. Finally, this draft is a clear attempt of those who, over the last decades, have committed huge numbers of aggressions illegal and international law, as well as coups, one of which indeed was the Maidan coup in Ukraine. They present themselves as champions of international law. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
Most sincerely regrets events taking place in the east of Europe. Russia and Ukraine have always been friendly country to the Republic of Serbia, and Serbian people perceives Russians and Ukrainians as fraternal nations. We felt loss of life of each man in Ukraine is true tragedy. The Republic of Serbia is committed to observing principles of territorial integrity and political independence of states as one of the basic principles of international law based on UN Charter and Final Act from Helsinki from 1975, which guarantees the right of states to inviolability of borders, just like it is committed to preservation of sovereignty and integrity of its own territory. The Republic of Serbia, likewise, advocating respect for territorial integrity of other sovereign nations, and regardless of not agreeing with all formulation state in resolution, will vote in favor of the resolution. I am obliged to point to PP 13 and remind that the first attack against a sovereign state on the soil of Europe after the Second World War took place not so long ago, in 1999, when 19 countries attacked, at that time, Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, primarily Republic of Serbia, when there was no appropriate reaction of such distinguished institution to this flagrant violation of UN Charter, despite the fact they still suffer from consequence of severe violation of fundamental principles of international law by others, Serbia is not giving up these principles even today. The Republic of Serbia will continue to advocate termination of conflicts, expecting that the parties will invest additional efforts into reaching diplomatic solution and creating conditions for peace throughout dialogue. Serbia will provide all kind of humanitarian aid to endangered Ukrainian citizens while remaining committed to peace and consistent respect for international law. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Serbia, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the draft resolution before us today clearly represents a prejudiced attitude based on political propaganda. It's a means of political pressure. Those who prepared the draft resolution incorporated an aggressive language against the Russian Federation to belittle its legitimate stand based on its security concerns and its right to protect its people from the threats to national Russian security elected by this draft resolution. This draft resolution represents a flagrant political hypocrisy. Had the US and its Western allies been serious in de-escalating the situation, they would have fulfilled the promises they undertook 3 decades ago not to expand EU and transform Ukraine into a continuous threat to the Russian Federation, and they should have pressured Ukraine to abide by Minsk and to stop the violations against the civilians in Donbass, let alone those countries' eagerness to supply Ukraine with heavy weaponry and missiles, encouraging volunteers to fight in Ukraine. This indicates the clear-cut desire of those countries for provocations and not for containment and de-escalation. This draft resolution coincides with a huge media campaign to spread erroneous information and lies. It's not designed to find a clear-cut and real solution for the crisis, rather to defame the Russian Federation. It is a text that is full of loopholes and untruths. It ignores the real reasons for the escalation of tension and for the eruption of hostilities. Those who are eager to defend the Charter of the United Nations now today, they should have shown the same eagerness vis-a-vis Israel's continued occupation of the Arab territories and the aggression committed by the Turkish forces against our territory. What about the U.S. violations of the territorial integrity of our land, Syrian territories? Syria's rejection of Western hegemonistic policies and interference in the internal affairs of states, prolongating crises, promulgating and spreading anarchy, opting for double standards and selectivities, imposing unilateral sanctions, make it necessary for us to reject this draft resolution and vote against it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Mr. President, it is clear from the debate over the past 2 days that the membership of the United Nations is united in its call to end the war in Ukraine and return to diplomacy. St. Vincent and the Grenadines wishes to offer an explanation of its vote on the draft resolution before us today. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines will vote in favor of the draft resolution. We will vote in accordance with our steadfast commitment to upholding the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, which form the core of multilateralism and gave birth to our United Nations 76 years ago. Repeating, Mr. President, that these principles underscore respect for sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity, peace, dialogue, and compromise for the preservation of humanity is not optional. As a small island developing state, full compliance with the bedrock principles of international law remains an existential issue. We take the floor again, Mr. President, to repeat our call as universal truths instead of selective, uneven, and unpredictable tools to further great power ambition anywhere and by anyone. Historically, and cynical misapplication of international law, which we have condemned. Today, we strongly emphasize that our august assembly should apply the fundamental principles of our charter impartially, irrespective of the size, economic, and military power of the principles involved. Mr. President, in the midst of prevailing global challenges, such as the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, we simply cannot afford, and therefore calls for an immediate ceasefire to avert further bloodshed, human suffering, and a global catastrophe, and to engage in peaceful dialogue to find a solution to this war post-haste. Today, we must unite for peace. Thank you, and peace profound to all.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have heard the last speaker in explanations of vote before the vote. Before proceeding to take a decision on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. In light of Article 18, paragraph 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to taking action on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 by a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The two-thirds majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of draft resolution A/ES-11/L1. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution and in addition to delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become the co-sponsors of A/ES-11/L11, Barbados and Cambodia. If any other country wishes to co-sponsor A/ES-11/L1, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. There is nothing further, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution AS-11/L1, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. The result of The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 41, against 5, abstentions 35. Draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Tunisia voted in favor of the draft resolution in support of the principles and values of the UN Charter on which our foreign policy is based. We would like to emphasize that the crisis must be settled by peaceful means, which is the ideal solution to prevent further aggravation of the situation and further human tragedy. The world witnessed so many grueling wars destructive to peace and security and the life of people. Our experience indicate that military options cannot solve any crisis. Dialogue and negotiations can settle all differences and finding compromises. The current crisis in Ukraine comes at a time the world was getting out of COVID-19 and prepared itself for a new stage based on solidarity, cooperation, and effective engagement in multilateral action and achieving our common agenda. We believe that the world cannot undertake or cannot burden itself by further crises. We encouraged the engagement of the parties in peaceful negotiations, and we urge the international community to intensify efforts to obligate these parties to resort to negotiations in a manner to cease hostilities and to prepare the way for finding permanent solution. Given the fact that international peace and security are a whole just questions in one standard so that peoples can regain their legitimate rights in accordance with international legitimacy to build a more stable, more peaceful world. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Rwanda.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Mr. President, Rwanda takes the floor to explain its position on the vote we just cast. Rwanda voted in favor of this resolution to firmly support the...
Mkuu wa chuo cha Kilimanjaro Institute of Technology and Management kilichopo Mwenge jijini Dar es Salaam na chenye ithibati na usajili wa NACTE namba REG/ANE/029 anapenda kuwatangazia nafasi za masomo kwa ngazi ya diploma na certificate katika kozi za IT, Business Administration, Accountancy, Procurement and Supply, Front Office na Hotel Management. Chuo kimebobea katika ufundishaji kwa njia ya vitendo na kimeweza kutoa wanafunzi wenye weledi. Wengi wameajiriwa ama kujiajiri, na wale ambao wameamua kuendelea na degree wameweza kujiunga na vyuo vikuu bora hapa nchini na nje ya nchi. Pia kuna ofa ya kozi fupi za computer application, graphic and design, video production pamoja na CCTV camera. Kwa maelezo zaidi piga simu namba 0717816034 au 0766348652. KITM, elimu na ujuzi kwa maendeleo ya uchumi.